Sure. Do we have quorum?
Yeah, I think we're good here.
Alrighty, I am going to not share again, since once again I'm on my laptop and don't have two screens. So feel free to open the doc and follow along. Otherwise, if somebody wouldn't mind sharing their screen with the doc, that would probably be helpful to folks on the call. And as well, if we could have a volunteer for note taking, that would be much appreciated.
Ideally, the note taker can also share their screen. So.
Would be a nice dual role if somebody wants to step up.
I was volunteering to do the scribing if somebody else shares the screen. I sometimes bounce back and forth as I try to collect links and stuff to detailed notes.
Makes sense. Appreciate that, Tim. I'll let somebody else silently do it. Great. So welcome to part 2 of the retrospective. Same rules, same process. This is a CNCF community meeting, so we all are bound to follow the community code of conduct. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on the internet. So be good to each other and don't do anything you wouldn't want your mother to know about. So picking up where we left off, I think we're going to have a little bit of a challenge on a couple of these items because Lockie is unable to join us today, but maybe one of his lead shadows could step in and talk about these two issues. The first one is the non-versioned job changes that hit master, causing cherry picks, making it so the cherry picks had to be manually identified in the release branch. Can somebody pick that up to discuss? Unfortunately, I don't know who the lead shadows were, so
I think.
Hi, it's me.
Hi, Gwen.
Hey, Gwen.
Gwen, did this happen while I was in orienteering? Because I think this happened later.
I'm sorry. The page is scrolling. I literally just woke up.
I feel you.
I'm not sure. I'm actually not sure what the context is right now. Non-version job changes. Yeah, I don't.
So, yeah.
I don't remember anything bad related to cherry picks. I mean, I remember stuff related to cherry picks, but not that. I don't know that non-version job changes were.
These sound like two different things potentially. There were some issues with the configurations of the test infra jobs for some mismatches. Basically, we have a config forker, which you can apply an annotation to a test infra job and allow it to be, when we run through the process of cutting a new branch, it basically takes that job and mirrors it to another branch, right? To another release branch, right? So there are several jobs that still remain that get forked into the -all branches, but not necessarily the -all the SIG release -x.y -all dashboards, right? But not necessarily the informing or blocking dashboards, which are the ones that are important for CI signal to be watching. So that's one piece, and I think these two are separate things actually. So job changes that cherry picking. I think I think the second part of this is kind of status quo, right? Like you have a job. I mean, you have a PR that needs to go into the release branch, and it's post our fast forward period, basically. Then you need to cherry pick it. That's not new to the process, really. So I'm not sure if
that's really confusing. I feel like after code freeze, cherry picks just get looked over manually, right?
Yeah, that's essentially what happens. So I think that maybe there's some space for more clarity in the, I guess, in the role handbooks as well as the branch manager handbook regarding this, because basically at the point that we stop fast forwarding, we should also essentially become temporary like patch release managers, right? Sort of, kind of, right, where we're watching the cherry picks in the same way that the patch release team would until the release gets cut.
I think a part of this too is beyond just the release team. The release team needs to understand what is proposed for cherry pick, but at the point that has happened, it's identifiable. But as soon as master starts marching forward, there's a question of which of these things should be cherry picked. And that part was maybe less clear. And then which of these things are targeting a cherry pick on the .0 release versus the .1 release was definitely unclear. We did a good job, I feel like, of triaging those as they came up, saying explicitly, hey, is this targeting .0 or can I wait for .1? How urgent it is? Because like we were talking about on Thursday, a lot of these things were just marked priority important soon versus critical urgent. So understanding that level of distinction at the SIG level in master branch is a gap. There's no existing process around that.
Yeah, so can we mark down an AI just to clarify some of that stuff? I think it'd probably be valuable to include in the release lead handbook as well as the branch management handbook. And we did, I think we did a better job than even usual. Normally all of our last minute heroes do an excellent job of triaging the stuff, but we were, I think, even more explicit about what we did and didn't want in the .0 due to those late stage test infra regressions. So.
Something else that might be related to this one is, for example, there was a change in one of the performance jobs from SIG scalability that broke. I forgot. It actually broke the pre-submit, so we weren't able to get the cherry picks in. And the action item from SIG scalability was to version their performance test framework. Do we have anything similar in any of the jobs or anything that is related to the release cycle where we depend on an external repo that is not version or
so two places, right? So the release repo itself, so Kubernetes/release, is one place that we have been talking about. There's an issue open for this regarding having the release repo fall in line with the way that we cut branches for Kubernetes, so that we can maybe decide that we want to cherry pick both, that we want to fast forward both at the same time. And then also start versioning that similarly to the way that we do Kubernetes. So that's an open discussion. I can find the link in a second. The second one that I didn't know existed until today was, not today, but this release cycle, was Kubernetes perf tests. And Kubernetes perf tests is the one that I believe George is referring to, that that something was changed. Maybe I think a daemon set was changed or something, and it broke a pre-submit. So yeah, we should look at, and I know that there might also be an issue open for that one, but that will take me a little bit to track down as well.
The issue for the perf test, I know where to find it. Should I post it in the notes? Or...
please do. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. We'll do.
I'm not sure I captured the action item quite right, but who wants to take it?
So I think in general, the action item for this should be to identify any repositories that are dependent or affect in some way the release of Kubernetes, and we should create some workflow to make sure that those external dependencies are their version in some way so that we don't break any releases. Does that make sense?
It does conceptually to me, but I defer to the group.
Yeah, that's fine. It'll be a larger discussion, because what I don't want is to necessarily dictate the way that another SIG handles their versioning. Though I agree that there should be some sort of gate to prevent us from breaking Kubernetes if we depend on that repo.
Okay, who can take the action item to do the documentation in the release management handbook?
That's me.
Excuse my shake of the head. Okay.
Well, I think as you do that, Stephen, you should do it in collaboration with the issue triage role and maybe branch manager role. I'm not sure if you're taking it on as sort of a SIG lead or if you're taking it on as branch manager, but it spans multiple.
Yeah, for sure. I'm taking it on as branch manager for 117. So.
Okay.
I do think you should include the issue triage person from 116 and 17, because part of this is that we don't have issues required. I think if there was an issue discovered in 116 RC, critical must fix for 1.16.0, at that level, it would be driving conversation and decision, where today we completely short circuit that and have a PR and it merges into master, but there's no discussion or artifacts of the discussion.
So I mean, we also have to look at the time between the generation of the failure and the fix, right? Because
and I don't care if there's no issue, but because we don't have the issue, we've stopped having some of the discussions and we have no artifacts of the decision process. So it can still be issue-less if that's what the community prefers, but we need a way for the issue triage person to know that there's some major thing going on. And because the SIG may stop once it's in master, not thinking about this other portion.
Well, the issue should be a kind failing test issue, right?
Okay, is there further parking lot that we should have about this?
No.
Okay. As long as folks feel that this is handled, I think we're okay. All right, let's move on to the next.
Craig, you're muted.
Mute failure. Let's move on to the next issue. So regression bugs in 116 were triaged manually, as Lockie notes. He's not here. Anybody else want to speak to that?
I also am not quite sure what this one means.
Yes, sorry.
To me, it feels like the same thing that we kind of ended off the prior bullet there. A regression has been reported. There's nothing tracking it, but there's been a PR to fix it. How do we make sure that we would get that in .0? How do we discover that happened in the first place and then make sure it gets into .0? And it was manual. It was Dems and Liggett as usual, making the connection like, hey, this thing is happening and code's flowing into master. We got to get it into the release also.
I'm curious what the definition of regression bug is in this case.
Well, Lockie is not here, so maybe we should table this for a future discussion.
Yeah.
Just really quick answering that. So unless I'm wrong and I'm getting mixed up with the context, regression bug usually means performance regression, and there were a couple towards the end of code that were discovered always by Jordan and Dean, among some other people. there was also the issue that I think we previously discussed, but SIG scalability, they actually discover another regression bug with updating Go 113. So I guess something related to that process. We can discover some type of regression. We discovered regression bugs, but there is not there's an issue in communication between the people who know about them and who know how to do them and the rest of the release team.
Yeah, so I think I would want some more clarity on this because, like, regression, as Gwen was suggesting, regression could kind of mean anything. There is also regression in test infra, and was it Planck or something that we needed to revert? The test infra needed to revert to get the train rolling again, right? So there were a bunch of things that happened towards the end of the cycle that were potential regressions in different places that. This needs to be better codified is the short version.
I would also be curious what is meant by, triaging it manually. I mean, someone has to notice at some point, right?
Exactly, yeah. The test failure, whether it be a pre-submit, post-submit, periodic failure, is the thing that should signal that something is broken, right? Once that happens, like we, as far as I know, don't have any means of auto remediation. So regressions would be triaged manually.
So I dropped a couple links from what we had tracked on the patch release side, things that were in flight that I think were related to that. But then there was, I'm trying to think of whether there was a link or what commit would reference it for the Prow Planck issue that had happened.
Let's
So a question for the team. Part of the reason I believe, like, there are people who say, like, release team, we should automate it away. And this is one of those questions, like, is there something here that is automatable, or is this where having the group of humans here thinking critically in those final 2 weeks is just required?
I think it's required today, and it will be for some time. There's a certain human touch that you don't get with the bots. Some people have mentioned automating away the need to bug people on PRs, or so like a bot doesn't do the same as signaling that something is still wrong and then pinging someone on Slack and then maybe emailing them and having a Zoom call with them. Like there's certain things that a bot doesn't have the touch to do. Same with enhancements, right? Same with CI signal. CI signal is essentially reading tea leaves every day, right? There's certain things that we cannot get rid of right this second. I'm not saying that we can't strive for more automation around some of these processes, but the human touch does help.
Josh mentioned in the chat that we might need to move on because we're 20 minutes in. And
I'm with Josh on this one. I was just going to try to get us to move on. So I think the open question here is there something there to talk about? To me, it sounds like probably not at this point. I think that can be left to the next release.
So one thing I would probably want to do here is we have the people who pop up towards the end, or are just lurking and waiting for bad things to happen and are ready to pounce on them. So the Dims and Liggett and Ben and Christoph, it would be interesting and nice and probably required to try to codify some of what they do or how they're that in tune to some of this work, and capture that in some set of handbooks, right? So there'd be CI signal and bug triage, and maybe a little bit in the release lead handbooks for future edification. We need a Dims and Liggett robot.
See how they feel about that. All right, let's start the next item. So is Taylor on the call?
Yes, indeed.
Awesome. You want to talk about this issue with embargo date?
You betcha. Happy Monday, everybody. So this issue, I got some feedback when we were just about to post the release 116 release blog, and there was a little bit of misunderstanding. It's always a communications problem. Funny enough, that came from the the communications group in CNCF. That when the clock struck 4:01, that release blog would be up and ready to go. And so I had explained, with the embargo that we had, you can't really post it before that time because that allows everyone to take a look at it. And so if we have some secret stuff or just some Easter egg stuff, kind of like we did for, for our release mascot, was there a better way to do that, or would it just be a great idea to set the expectation with the CNCF that even though the embargo time is at this time, we will do our best to post it as quickly as possible, get it through all the approvals, and kind of not throw our process away? Or does it make sense to put the embargo time a little bit later and then post it with the understanding that we'll be posting it, several hours beforehand?
So in general, try to follow the process, but tight loop with the CNCF. Ideally, no one is posting anything until we have actually posted the thing that we need to post, right? So if it's not there at 4:01, or it's not there at 4:50, or it's not there at 6:20, right? Like, we should not be, the train shouldn't be in motion and until that happens. I know from CoreOS and Red Hat and VMware, we wait. We may have the information ahead of time, but we do not go until they go or you go. So
cool.
Actually, quick
yeah,
question.
I think
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I do think it was just a misunderstanding, because when I had gotten reached out to, it was like about 4:01, 4:02, and I was like, "Where the heck is this at?" Is a little bit of anger, a little bit of confusion, and I said, "Oh, that's not the expectation. Here's how it typically works." And so that did just seem like a moment of education, but wanted to see if there was any other thoughts on ways that we can remediate or update that process. Sounds like it's fine as is. We just up the communication or the feedback loop, so to speak.
Yeah, I think it's fine as is. There are also new people on comms who have not been part of on the CNCF side, who have not been part of the release flow before. So that's something to keep in mind, right?
Gotcha.
But yeah, I think if you think it's fine, I think our process is probably fine too. It's just important on the release day that comms and CNCF are like tight.
Cool. I dig it. Yeah, take away 2 peas in a pod. Got it. Thank you.
Okay, great. And so the action item there is to document that, or is there no action item there?
It would help to document that. I can just add as a footnote if it's not already in the handbook. But yeah, I'd say that's probably the best takeaway.
Okay. Next item. Josh, you want to talk about the major feature that had no release note?
Yeah. So this was another one of those things where we've had an issue open in SIG Release for a really long time, that we need to have an extensive set of guidelines for contributors for when they add a release note and when they don't add a release note, and what it needs to contain. The document does not exist. And this came up again because a contributor who was working on a major feature that was split across like 6 different PRs decided the way to approach that was to not put a release note on any of those PRs, and instead wait for the theme sweep with the release notes, but was apparently on PTO during the theme sweep. So we got to literally the morning of the release, and there was no release note for what's a major feature. And a lot of people like me had assumed, particularly with the difficulty of tracking 6 different PRs, had assumed that the feature just didn't make it in. So the to-do here is that we really need to finish that document and address cases like this, and address the case that, hey, given that we have automation now, it is far better to have too many release notes than too few. We can delete them relatively easily. Figuring out which things deserve a release note and nobody wrote one on is a lot harder.
So when you say finished, do you mean that there's already a draft document in the works?
There are some guidelines for release notes. They're just extremely skeletal. And they don't, they basically address the mechanics of how you add a release note in
Not the criteria.
PR thing, but not the criteria.
Got it.
Right. So this is not just release notes. This falls into a little bit of the enhancement side too, right? Enhancements and comms, right? As a SIG, you should know what you're landing for the cycle, right? And that should have happened as a result of planning for the cycle. So this shouldn't be a last minute surprise or someone's on PTO and we missed this part, right? This should be a constant thing, right? So this goes back to SIGs need to be doing planning.
Anyway, we'll assign the documentation thing to me. I'll probably foist it off on somebody else, but it needs to be assigned right now.
So there are already assignees on that one. Do we want it on the?
No, if there are assignees, they can have it.
Yeah, it's Mike, Nick Chase, and Lindsay. But we probably want to shift that to the next set of release notes peeps. Or the 116 release notes peeps if they want to tackle that.
Yeah,
if any of them are on the call.
Not on the current team, honestly.
Yeah.
Was that particular one caught in the enhancements process?
No, it was caught because the contributor actually spoke up on.
No, I mean at the like months before that. Was this one that was this particular item on the enhancement sheet for tracking?
It's a good question. I don't know.
That may be a place where we can catch some of these also, or cross-reference. Did everything that was in the enhancement sheet make release notes?
Yeah, and I don't think is anybody from the enhancements team on the call right now?
Bob?
Yep, sorry, I was trying to unmute my mic.
Is that something you track?
The release notes? No.
Okay, that sounds like a major thing that we ought to have. We ought to have a check mark. Because, I mean, anything that's worthy of tracking as enhancements can have at least one release note.
We do track, well, Docs tracks it in the sheet, but not the release notes themselves.
Right. Yeah, and the release note's actually a different item. So I think that's a suggestion for the upcoming enhancements team, that they ought to add a column for has release note.
So I don't disagree. What I worry about there is that this is again, this is like the bug triage, issue triage, and moving the milestone or clearing the milestone, where this is the responsibility of the SIG, right? And not the responsibility of the enhancements team. What we're essentially asking the enhancements team to do at this point is do PR triage as well and make sure PRs have release notes for enhancements that should have release notes. This is something that SIG should know. I'm not saying that there's not a gap there, but we need to push that up to SIGs.
Right. Even if the SIGs are supposed to know how to operate the trapeze themselves, it's always helpful to have a safety net.
There was also a piece of feedback from someone's exit survey that that it was hard, if not impossible, to try to get people to update their release notes post-merge. I'm thinking about what we can do there, but I've only recently read that, so.
I'm worried about a couple of those AIs. I'm not sure how that last one can be owned.
Assign it to the SIG chairs. This is something we have to pound the drum on, really.
So what's going to need to happen there is some more education. Exactly. It's not just documenting.
Yeah, is our documentation tight as it stands today? Can we say, and I want to say the answer is yes. Can we say that we have done enough in terms of what is in the PR template for adding release notes, the instructions on adding release notes, and any guidance that we have across like community, devel, SIG release notes, or wherever it is? Can we say that documentation is enough? If the answer is yes, right, then it becomes well, SIGs aren't doing this, right? So it's an email to KDev, it's an email to SIG leads to let them know that they need to be watching this stuff. We also need to be aware of the fact that the people who are landing features that are parts of enhancements that are being tracked for the release are not necessarily people who are consistent members of any one SIG, right? So we need a process that is amenable to those people, and it doesn't cause too much friction, but we also need to impress upon the SIG chairs that that's something that they need to look out for, right? Again, this is not something that I want strictly on the enhancements team or strictly on the release notes team. It's not fair to them.
It sounds like it might belong in the SIG lead handbook.
So we don't, yeah.
The way that I have read this, I have always inferred, and I've been reviewing some of the PRs lately that come in about giving better bot instructions for release notes, because we have a new release notes process, right? The way that I've seen it, I've inferred that it is the SIG's job to make sure that the features they put in have docs. So I would agree. I would side in agreement on this is making sure we communicate that it happens. This is less, we need to make it happen.
Yeah.
I can't write a release note for a feature I didn't write. That seems not cool.
Yeah, right, and that's why I think we're saying the SIG leads need to be the one to make sure that happens as they're doing their reviews of the features going in through their SIG. Right?
Yeah, and it's not just, it's SIG, it's the chairs, the technical leads, the reviewers, approvers, right? We have a process where you can't get a PR in unless you explicitly say that it either has a release note or it doesn't. So the reviewers and approvers of those PRs need to be making sure that things that need to have release notes actually do.
All right, shall we move on to the next item? Yes. Okay, release engineering. The official release publication happened before for PML. Almost all the other actions followed embargo policy. So this is a follow-on of the embargo workflow. Yang, are you here?
Yes. Yeah, this one is mine. So I think this is a rather simple one. All we need to do is decide, is this a hard requirement? And I've already added a note for this in the branch manager handbook.
Yeah, so this is a tricksy one. It's simple, but it's hard. And part of the reason for that is because we have a disconnect in the process between the time that a release is published on GitHub and all of the artifacts of a release are published, right? So when a release is published on GitHub, the the release is actually there. You can see the notes. You can see the SHA sums. You can see the TARs if you go to the GCS bucket and so on and so forth. But people who are looking for debs and RPMs will not see them until the debs and RPMs have finished being cut, right? So there is so and what we'll see, and I think that's happened this release as well. Or the release beforehand, someone opened an issue that's that the release was published, but they couldn't see the debs or RPMs, right? And there's a natural lag in that process as a result of the hands that touch it before it actually makes it out the door, right? So part of that we're going to be working on for this cycle. I'm going to cross my fingers and say that we can do it in a cycle, is essentially to play around with the idea of, well, not play around, but actually test the idea of having a CNCF repos, right? CNCF apt and Yum repositories, right? Because the big piece is that the debs and RPMs are signed with a Google signing key, so, and published to Google repos. So this can only be done by a Googler today, right? If we can do that within the community, and we have some ideas for this already, it's just a matter of planning and execution. If we can do that within the community, then we can start to tie this process together, right? So there's no longer anyone who clicks that button to say release will release all of the artifacts, right? And the signing will happen during that process, and everything will be published at the same time, right? So that will eliminate that disconnect. But for me, I feel that from the staging side, staging can kind of happen anytime that day, and I think I think Yang did it in the morning his time, and then release. We try to do. The question is, like, does it matter when we do the release if we know today there's already that disconnect, right? If we start the release process at 4 as the blog's going out, then we know that there is about a 2-hour window between the time that the artifacts are published, at least a 2-hour window, between the time the artifacts are published, the standard artifacts that we control are published, and the debs and RPMs are actually published, right? So if we say that we're okay with releasing anytime during that day, and that the announcement only happens after 4, then I'm fine with that too.
Yeah, so I think the point of the doc is to make the gap as short as possible, but it will also cause time zones issues.
So the gap that we're more concerned about is the gap between the standard artifacts and the debs and RPMs, right? The gap between the release timing and the embargo lift is not really as important, from my perspective at least.
Sorry, actually I have a question. So has there been any actual work as far as getting these debs and RPMs not released by Google? I know Aaron Kuchenberger has expressed great interest in this front, but I have not synced up with him recently, and I'm just not aware of I'm not following any community issues or things on this. That's my question.
So that is going to be my big white whale for 117. If I get anything out of this cycle, it will be standing up those repos.
I see. So that's when is 117? Is that like next month or
So we're just starting the cycle. So middle of December, Gwen, if I'm correct.
Okay.
Should be your release date. We've got a little time. It's a little tricky with US holidays and KubeCon coming up and people planning for all of that stuff. But that is my top priority, honestly, for release engineering.
I'm assuming there's already an issue tracker for this or something.
Yes, it's somewhere. I can dig it up. Give me a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So I think we are ready to move on to what we're going to do differently. And we only have about less than 20 minutes left. So let's try to get through it quick. So SIG Scalability has a to do differently, adding performance engineering role to the release team for the readout. Are there any action items there, or this is already actioned, Gwen? This is already accomplished. Request additional funding through the steering committee or Google for scalability testing on release branches and forked scalability testing for Golang +1 version.
So yeah, these are two things that we need to discuss, because I think the common line for the last few releases has been, we don't do this because it's expensive. We as a community, I don't think actually know the cost of doing these tests, and we're unable to introspect on the cost because it's in a project that we don't own, right? That might, I think, yeah, that's still true. We have, so SIG release chairs have access to the Kubernetes release test project, which is the one that makes the gears go for the staging and release parts. But I believe the Kubernetes release dev or Kubernetes CI or something GCP project is not one that we can touch in any way. And that's the one that that some of these tests are running on. So yes, this is an action for SIG release chairs. They're requesting additional funding or figuring out a way to introspect on those tests. Adding a performance engineering role, that is up to the release team. I think it's a good idea. So my suggestion was a performance engineering role that we would staff on the release team side, or which I think is potentially a good idea, but I think will be difficult to staff if it's not someone who's already on scalability. The second idea, which is somewhat related, is having a scalability liaison to the release team, which is essentially a dedicated resource from SIG Scalability who will be super responsive to requests from the release team and report in on status of scalability in a more near real-time fashion than we normally get from scalability. Just a note for people who are taking a look at the doc, if you go to the bottom of it, you'll see action items. So what I did before this meeting is captured most of the action items from 115 and 116. Stuff that we had written from part 1 as well as part of part 2 is already captured in in kind of an umbrella issue on GitHub. I think that one of the things that we end up not doing is coming back to the retrospective action items until close to the time of the next retrospective. So having this in the active project board is, I think, would be useful. So Gwen, thoughts on that?
Not at this point. Let me think about that.
Looks like the action item is to think about it.
Yeah, honestly, I haven't really, that seems like a good idea. I would like to go with something that we have similar to what we have for SIG test for SIG testing, right? I want to have somebody on speed dial from scalability that will be responsive, and will notify us, or we can notify them if we see things, and then we would have the option of addressing it more reliably and more quickly. I can put that on my docket. Go to SIG Scalability's meeting and say, hi, I need to have an on-call person.
It's probably easier if you do it from the mailing list and include a bunch of us on it,
Sure.
because I'm not sure when they actually have meetings.
Sure.
Also, just as a reminder, there is an action item between release team and scalability to have one meeting per month to catch up on things. So we could schedule the first one and start talking about this more in depth.
Yeah, let's so that should be, so between the release team lead and the SIG and the CI signal lead for the cycle should be handling scheduling that meeting. The CI signal lead can probably take it. That meeting should include scalability chairs, release team leads, lead and lead shadows, and the CI signal team. And we should set that meeting for once the shadows are set, right? That way we have the full team and we can introduce everyone.
Okay, the other action items good on this issue? I'm
unclear on why we need an explicit meeting.
Because the communication has not been clear in the past.
Right. That's right, but if we're
having this meeting because we've had problems in the past, and
I know we've had problems. I also know that we're trying to address it. I'm not sure that having a meeting is is necessary. I'm not sure what a meeting has that having a regular person to either attend a release team meeting upon invite or to discuss with via Slack wouldn't be able to do, because we've not had that either.
That's true. The meeting was the first step. If this is a thing that works, then maybe we don't need the meeting, but it's because it's essentially a cross-SIG issue that slows up our releases pretty much every cycle that we started that meeting.
Okay, are we okay with the other action items on this SIG scalability line? Okay, great. Let's move on. So in CI, Josh, you brought up an issue about consistency between informing and blocking across master and releases. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, well, there's already several issues open on this. There's both, we've been working on the informing and blocking criteria, and then the second problem is that when we branched off the 116 test jobs, we discovered that the code that creates the per version jobs had a different list of jobs than what we had in master. And so that caused some confusion. And then on top of which, we're looking at taking more things out of blocking because they were flaky during the 116 cycle. and as flaky jobs, they shouldn't be in blocking. So that's an ongoing thing, and there are issues open in both SIG release and test info already.
Yeah,
So
and that's
Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, that's also included on the 115 AIs that captures kind of like the retrospective items. So clean up SIG release, test grid dashboards, move failing jobs to orphaned, ensure all blocking jobs are alerted on, ensure relevant blocking and forming jobs are properly forked, move jobs that were consistently flaky from blocking to informing.
Okay, so do we feel like that sufficiently addresses the issue for this release?
They would, I think so.
Any dissenting voices? Okay, great. Next item is add shadow task section to each handbook. Josh, is that tracked or?
Yeah, but I haven't assigned it to the different groups. So that'll be something probably looking to do in 117. I'll leave that up to Claire. So I've finally gotten merged in a bunch of general documentations about what shadowing it is and why we do it and that sort of thing. And so from here, what we need in each of the handbooks is a section that says what new shadows will be doing as part of that handbook, or make some comments in that regard. A couple of handbooks already kind of have this, and we just want to get it for the rest. So so that follow-up is on me because it's my issue. I need to go through and do the usual tracking issue thing and say, okay, here's the handbooks that have this, here's the ones that don't. The same as we did for time and qualifications expectations.
Okay, so
and I think some are happening. There's a link to a portion on not in the SIG release handbooks, but some stuff around community where some related things were happening for shadows.
Sorry, what?
So just as an example, some shadows in other places are starting to document what it means to shadow.
Nah, got it.
okay, CI, remove jobs that were consistently flaky. Hey, that was one of the action items in the CI consistency item above. Is this a duplicate or is this something different? Doesn't have a reporter.
It's probably a dupe. We mentioned this thing a bunch, so
yeah, feels like a dupe. If that's the case, are there any other items that were not on the list?
Oh yeah, no, I reported that one, and this is the flaky test I was talking about earlier. And I see. To open an issue about it.
Okay, so if you're going to open an issue and then also track it, then I think we're good. Any other items that are not on the list? Going once. Twice. All right, let's call that a close. I think the last action item is, Stephen, you had captured action items into that tracking issue. Are you going to take the action to add the additional ones, or is that something you want me to take?
I can do it since I have access to edit the description.
Okay, sounds great. I will relinquish any control I have over this meeting. Thank you.
All right, so with the 4 minutes that we have left, everyone, is there anything that you want to talk about SIG release related that was not on the agenda for the SIG release meeting? I know it's a short amount of time, but.
Just like, you people are awesome, and we sort of, and I know the retrospective is always this like long, drawn out thing, but like, I feel like we should all give ourselves big pats on the back because We did a cool retro. We managed to stay positive and forward-looking and solution-oriented, and overall, it's a really, really positive experience to be collaborating with everyone.
This is how we continually improve.
Okay, so next week we will be having the wow, okay, brain fart. The release engineering meeting in the same time slot. We will start to talk about some of the plans for 117 once I start writing some of them down, and I will hope that the release manager associates, the branch management, the patch release team, anyone who is interested in release management in general joins that call, because we have a lot of work to do for 117. If you're generally interested in helping out on that stuff, you can find us on the SIG Release channel in Slack, the release management channel in Slack as well. If you want to chat about how you can contribute and want to do that privately, I'm Just Augustus on Slack. Tim is here too, and that's T Pepper on Slack. What else? What else is there? So in 2 minutes, we will be starting the 117 release team meeting, the first official one. Primarily that is leads only, but anyone who is interested in hanging out for that, we will be on the same Zoom call. So don't go anywhere, or stop and get a quick break and then come back. But thank you again, everyone. I seriously like the work that you all do. Just echoing some of the stuff that Gwen was saying, the work that you all do is truly amazing. And every cycle I get, I like even more and more impressed by how the things are coming along, right? So seriously, hats off to all of you. All right, gonna stop the recording.